morning, friends. Welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here in the garden today, and I thought it would be a great time to give you guys the June garden tour. Now, a couple little disclaimers before we get started. First of all, you may have already noticed my chickens are in a very talkative mood this morning, so you probably will hear them in the background. Second of all, I have a confession. I love gardening, and, I think my garden's beautiful, but it's a little messy. I, confession again, am a little bit of a lazy gardener. So I do what needs to be done to keep my plants healthy, but I don't always make all the details perfect. So feel free to come hang out with me in the garden today. I'm just going to give you a little tour of my garden. I didn't polish this up and make it perfect for you. So that being said, you know what to expect. I hope you'll come walk through the garden with me. So we're starting over here in the garden expansion. You can see I've got a handful of herbs growing right along the edge here. And then in this first bed here, I've got lots of tomato plants. This one, I've got to say I'm a little confused about. I purchased this one at a local nursery, labeled as a Cherokee Purple, but I don't know if you can really. This is looking to me like it's shaping up to be some type of cherry tomato, so I'm thinking it must have been mislabeled, which I'm a little disappointed about because Cherokee Purple is my favorite slicing tomato. I start the vast majority of my tomato plants from seed. That allows me to grow a lot of different varieties at a lot lower cost than if I purchased all started transplants. But for some reason, my Cherokee Purple seeds didn't germinate this year. And rather than taking time to try to start a second batch, I decided to pick up some transplants at a local nursery. I did get 2 Cherokee Purple plants, and both of them are seeming like this. Both of them seem to be some type of cherry tomato. So I don't know if there was some type of seed mix-up or if the nursery mixed up labels. I don't really know what happened, but I'm going to keep an eye on these plants as the season goes on, and I'll keep you updated. It looks like I am going to have to miss out on my beloved Cherokee Purple this year, unfortunately. But I do have a lot of other really delicious varieties, some tried and trues, and some others that are new, but that look really delicious that I'm excited to try. So back here, this is a Brandywine. You can see this one doesn't have any tomatoes yet. I purchased this one at a local nursery as well. It has been my experience with Brandywine in the past that it tends to yield a little bit later than my other tomato plants, but then it produces longer in the season. So a lot of times when my other tomato plants are kind of on the way out, I will still get some Brandywines. Now you can see I've lined the edge of the bed with some nasturtiums, basils, which this one is getting munched on, and a few onions. So we'll see how those do. Now back here, basically this entire bed here, I've got 5 tomato plants in this bed. This entire bed here with the 5 tomato plants, these are all plants that I purchased as transplants from a local nursery. I like to, as I said, start the majority of my tomato plants. But when I go to a local nursery, I always see some interesting kinds that catch my eye. So I'm trying a few new varieties this year. All of these were purchased as starts. So this plant in the back here, this is actually a hybrid tomato called Chef's Choice Black. You can see it's got, if the camera will focus on it, trying to get to focus on those tomatoes there. It's got a little cluster of small tomatoes, and this is Chef's Choice Orange from the same line. This one just has a couple little tomatoes in the back starting. And then this tomato here is a Russian Big Roma. This is a new variety to me. And there you can see some tomatoes. So I like to split my tomatoes pretty evenly every year between tried and true varieties that I've grown for many years that I know are delicious, that I know are dependable. And, the other half is made up of lots of new varieties because that's how you find your new favorites. At the end of the tomato bed here, my plan was to grow melons up this trellis here. Unfortunately, the slugs have been enjoying my melon plants. So I have a couple little ones. I've got this one here. Back there's one. And then here I've got a tiny little one. These have all been heavily munched on, so I'm not sure how they're going to do. And then on the other side of the trellis, I was planning to grow melons along here as well. Those have not been working. So I did recently just plant pole beans here, and you can see these are just starting to come up. Slugs have been really bad in my garden this year. There's always slugs around, but normally I don't have any kind of significant issue with them, so I never really take any measures to control them. Just kind of pick them off when I see them. But this year, they have been worse than usual. They have destroyed so many of my young seedlings. So I planted beans here because in other parts of my garden, well, first of all, I have replanted these melons maybe 3 times, and each time they've been consistently eaten as soon as they've sprouted. In other parts of my garden, I have planted pole beans, which have been munched on as well, but the pole beans I find are a little more resilient and able to come back from that. So I planted them here because I think at this point it's a little bit late to try melons again. So I planted a pole bean variety called Vortex, which has a fairly early maturity date. And I anticipate that they will get munched on a little bit, but I'm hoping that they will be able to catch up. Now here you can see the fronds of my asparagus peeking through. Now if you were following along with me earlier this year, you know that my raspberries down there jumped over the walkway and crawled up several feet of stone wall, and it's kind of hard to really see the perspective in this video, but this stone wall is elevated above the raspberry bed. And they basically came up all mixed in with my asparagus. So I debated about what to do because, my instinct is to not kill any type of potential food-bearing desirable plant. But what I ultimately decided to do was to cut down all the raspberries in the asparagus because, honestly, if I let the raspberries go, they're just going to keep expanding and eventually try to take over this entire garden, and I can't have that. I mean, they have their whole space down there. They've got plenty of space. So I realized that by cutting them down at the base, I'm not doing anything against the roots. They are going to come back. I'm just going to have to keep cutting them until hopefully at some point they get the message. We'll see what happens. But I don't think there's any way that I could actually dig the roots out without damaging the asparagus roots at this point. So that's what I decided to do, at least for the meantime. If you have any other better suggestions for how to handle that, please let me know because I'm not really sure what to do about this. So you can see I haven't gotten to cutting all of them out yet. Now there is one more issue. As you can see, a lot of my asparagus ferns have crispy tops, and I didn't recognize this issue at first, I think because it was so crowded with the raspberries. But you can see there, I don't know if you can see that little pest there, that little worm thing behind my hand. I think that is an asparagus beetle larvae. I have not dealt with asparagus beetles or their larvae before, so I know I could easily look up what to do about them. I haven't done anything about it yet because honestly I thought they were pretty much done, but now that I'm looking, I am seeing a couple more of them. So I did try spraying BT on them. I wasn't sure if that was going to work or not because it wasn't labeled for asparagus beetle larvae. BT is a biological control. It's basically a microorganism. It basically targets insects in their larval form like caterpillars. So I tried it on these hoping that it would work. As I said, it wasn't labeled for them. I don't know if it really did anything. So if you have alternate suggestions, I want to do something organic because I prefer no spray as much as possible, but I don't think that hand picking is really practical in the situation. So if you could just give me any advice that you have about how to control these, I'd love to hear that. So you can see my asparagus. There's a mix of ferns that look really nice and beautiful, and then ferns that look like this. So moving down here, I've got a little trio of pots here. I have a couple watermelons started in here. This is kind of a defense against the slugs. They were eating all the watermelons in my garden, but these seem to be untouched. These 2 pots here I have reserved for some tomato suckers that I'm rooting. Rooting tomato suckers is a great way to get free plants. Depending on your growing method for tomatoes, most often people will prune out the suckers anyway. So, I try to catch them when they're really small, but there's always a few that get away from me. And if you find them when they're, maybe like 4 inches long or a little bit longer than that, you can clip them, stick them in a jar of water, and root them. So I have 2 tomato suckers rooting right now, and those are going to go in these pots once they're fully rooted. I like to do that every year because basically that allows me to extend my tomato harvest without having to start anything else from seed. So, tomatoes are fairly susceptible to disease. So by the end of the season, by the time frost comes, I'm anticipating that most of the tomatoes in my garden won't really be yielding anymore because they will have succumbed at least partially to disease. So by starting some new fresh plants over here in these pots, I'm going to hopefully extend my tomato harvest season a little bit. So next time you see my garden, hopefully there'll be some little tomato plants in those pots there. Now across the way, this is my kind of random bed. It's officially the sweet potato bed. So you can see there's a handful of young sweet potatoes in here, and eventually these will take over and cover the entire bed. But I do have a couple tomatoes in here too. And I've lined the edge with onions. I've got some nasturtiums. This is a volunteer tomato. I'm guessing this was in my compost because I did not have tomatoes in this bed last year. Got a calendula here, another tomato, and then just some flowers. I've got some pretty little zinnias mixed in. On the trellis here, I am trying to cover this trellis, this arch, with a mix of climbing squashes. So I've got butternut squash and honey nut squash here. One of the most beautiful things, in my opinion, in a garden is a trellis completely covered with lush plant growth. And even better if it's got some beautiful fruits or vegetables on it too. So last year, the trellises in the side yard garden, we built this garden last year and put them in for the first time last year. And the trellises were kind of a letdown. I mean, the trellises were fine. I wasn't able to grow the plants to fully cover the trellises last year. So I'm determined to do that this year. So I've got these squashes here, which are off to a good start, and I'm hoping will climb to the top of the trellis by the end of the season. I did plant some seeds on the edges for matching squashes to come up this side. I have been struggling with that same issue with slugs in this bed too, so I'm not sure. I may only have half of the trellis covered, so we'll see. Even if it goes up to the middle, that's still better than nothing. So over here are the strawberries. You can see I've still got a few little strawberries left, although the harvest is mostly done at this point. So they're actually starting to put out runners, which I'm going to have to transplant at some point soon. Over here, I've got a random pepper plant in this pot here. This is an orange Corno de Toro pepper. I'm trying this specific pepper for the first time this year. I grew the red and the yellow Corno de Toro varieties last year for the first time. I really liked both of them. So this year I found out that there is also an orange variety and a chocolate variety. So, of course I had to try both of them. Both of those are fairly rare. It's pretty hard to find seeds for either the chocolate or the orange. But they are both open pollinated varieties, which means as long as I can prevent cross-pollination, I can save my own seeds and have my own secure supply of those seeds. So what I decided to do, because I'm growing all my peppers in pots, the easiest way for me to prevent cross-pollination was just to separate it from the other peppers. So I brought this down here when I saw that it had some buds that were about to open. I brought this plant down here. I separated it from all the other peppers that are up on my deck so that way when those flowers open, they'll get pollinated just from the plant itself, as opposed to getting pollinated from other peppers. That's going to minimize my chance of cross-pollination. That way I can save seeds from those peppers, knowing that the seeds are pure and will basically grow the same plant for me next year. So you can see there's a couple little flowers open now. So once these get pollinated and tiny peppers start to form, I'm going to take a little bit of this tape here. You can see the tape that I'm using to tie it to its stake. I'm going to tie that around the stem of each of these tiny peppers, and that will show me which of these peppers have pure seed in them. And then I'll return this pepper pot up to the deck with the friends. You can see I've got a little nasturtium buddy growing in that pot too. Along this fence here, I have my blackberries, and it looks like I should actually get a handful of blackberries for the first time this year, which is really exciting. So I planted these a couple years ago, but this will be the first year that they actually yield a significant number of blackberries for me. And then across the way here, you can see my sugar pie pumpkin is just running with abandon, taking over. So that's why I planted it in the corner of the bed like this, just to give it freedom to sprawl along the walkway. I'd rather lose walkway space than some of my precious raised bed space. Now this is officially the garlic bed. You can see the garlic is looking a little bit sad. That means it's taking all the energy in these green leaves and sending it down into the bulb, which is hopefully going to result in nice big garlic bulbs for me. And oh, I see a garlic scape that I missed harvesting. So this guy will have to come in with me. So this bed here is mostly German white garlic. That's a hardneck variety that has really nice big garlic cloves and that grows really well in my area. You can, if you grow your own garlic, you can, once you cure it, you can replant, break the head into its individual cloves, and then replant those cloves in the fall. And then each of those cloves will form a complete head. So that's what I've been doing here. I haven't purchased seed garlic for this variety in years. Down here on this side of the bed, this is a different variety. This is actually elephant garlic, and this is my very first year growing this garlic, so I'm not really sure what to expect. Elephant garlic, from what I've heard, doesn't like my climate as much, and it's definitely yellowing, but I'm hoping that's just because it's sending its energy into the bulbs, and hopefully this will give us a good harvest as well. So over the course of the last week to week and a half, I've harvested all the garlic scapes in this bed, aside from the one that I missed, so I'll bring that inside with me when I go in. So it's going to be a few more weeks. Now that I'm looking, I see a second scape that I missed, so that one will come in with me too. So it's going to be a few more weeks before the garlic is fully ready to harvest. I'll take you with me when I do that. But pretty soon we'll be pulling this up and we'll see how it did. So heading over to the final bed in this area of the garden. This is another hodgepodge bed. In this half here I have brassicas. Basically what happened was I had extra broccoli, kale, cabbage that I started, wouldn't fit in the spots I had assigned for them. So I'm planting that all here in just a big mix. So these plants, all the ones with leaves like this, are broccoli. This is a Savoy cabbage here. I've got a few different kinds of kale. This is a Russian red kale. Over here is an early Jersey Wakefield cabbage that is getting munched on by caterpillars. So I'm going to have to come out here and deal with that. I do have these beautiful, delicate little poppies blooming. Kind of mixed them in, and they're really pretty. This bloom is kind of on the way out, but you can see that one's a pale pink. This was the mother of pearl poppy mix, so it's supposed to be all different colors. They've all been, so far, either white or very close to white. They're really pretty. On this half of the bed, I've got a variety of tomatoes. These are basically all the extra tomatoes that I ran out of space for. This poor tomato I accidentally beheaded yesterday. It was growing outside its cage, and I tried to gently bring it back in, but accidentally snapped the top off. So this is the top, which I just stuck in the ground, and I'm going to see if that roots. And then along this trellis here, I'm growing mini pumpkins. So I have some of the Jack Be Little, which is the mini orange pumpkin, and some Baby Boo, which is the mini white pumpkin. So I'm hoping these will climb up the trellis and be really beautiful for us. And then across the way in the edge of the garlic bed, you can see I have some tiny little mini pumpkin seedlings just starting. So those will hopefully grow up this trellis and be really beautiful this season. On this side of the fence here, I have my lemon balm that you can see. We harvested some of that together. I also stuck some extra cucumber seedlings, or extra cucumber seeds, along this fence here. It's been a bit of a challenging cucumber year. This one, for example, you can see got nibbled by slugs, and then something, I think it was a raccoon, dug it up. So I replanted it, and I'm hoping that will come back from that assault that it suffered. Here's the lemon balm. Some little cucumber seedlings here, a little bit bigger here. Planted some nasturtiums in here just for some color. More lemon balm and a couple more cucumber seedlings. So while this is first and foremost a vegetable garden tour, I think you can see behind me something that I want to give you a closer look at because it is the most beautiful it's ever been this year. So here in Connecticut, it's an absolutely stunning hydrangea year. I mean, this is basically a showstopper this year. Look at these beautiful heads of true blue flowers. So hydrangeas have been quite the topic in my Connecticut gardening Facebook groups that I'm a part of. Apparently all around the state, everyone is having an amazing hydrangea year this year. So last year my hydrangeas barely bloomed, and apparently that was pretty much the norm in Connecticut too. But last summer we had a really rainy summer, then we had a fairly mild winter, and then early spring we had more rain, and apparently that all is the magic recipe for beautiful hydrangeas. So I'm just really soaking in just all this beauty this year. So the raspberries aren't quite ready yet, but you can see it's shaping up to be a really productive raspberry year too. All throughout this patch we've got Lots of these little immature raspberries. So we're going to head on over to the main vegetable garden now, and I'll show you how everything's growing over there. So outside the garden, the peas have had, an okay year. It's probably been a little bit less than average, I would say. I don't think I had as good germination or as good yield. That being said, we are still getting some nice spring peas. We've still definitely been enjoying them. So all down the fence there, snap peas, and then of course my patch of catnip in front. And then the lemon thyme is blooming and beautiful right now. I actually am almost out of dried oregano inside, so I need to harvest some of this and dry some more. Let's see how much rain we got yesterday. It felt like we got a lot more than that, but not quite half an inch. So, all right, let's head inside the garden. So I know I mentioned earlier, has been a really challenging cucumber year, which is true. This little patch right here is the exception. These are my homemade pickles cucumbers. That's a green pickling cucumber, really delicious. One of my top 2 cucumber varieties. I really love them. These are all fine and untouched. Where across from me, along this side of the fence, I planted my silver slicers. You can see I've got this one, which is small, but otherwise looks fairly decent. And then you can see very noticeable absence of other cucumbers. These were all eaten by slugs. I'm not sure what the difference is between these cucumbers here and the ones on the other side as far as slugs are concerned. I don't know if maybe they just prefer the flavor of the silver slicer variety. I don't know if it's because maybe this side gets more sun or something like that and they don't like to be in the sun. I don't really know what the difference is. But I think next year what I'm going to do is not put all of one variety on each side. I think I'm going to mix it up a little bit so that hopefully I'm able to get both varieties to do well. So as you can see, we're just starting to get some cucumbers. This one looks like it probably just got pollinated yesterday. This one hopefully gets pollinated today. Got one down here too. This cucumber is actually a lemon cucumber, which is really just a round yellow snacking cucumber. So this one has survived. So as you can see, these are eager to begin production for us. In this covered bed here, this is my official broccoli bed. I'm going to go ahead and uncover this so that we can take a look. So in this bed is a prime example of what I was telling you before when I said that I am kind of a lazy gardener with an imperfect garden. Nonetheless, we are still going to get a good harvest from this, but you'll see lots of, flaws in this bed as I show you. So the broccolis, I've got a few different varieties in here. Some of them, so you can see that one back there, that head is actually about ready to harvest. I've got one here. This is not quite ready to harvest yet. It needs to get a little bigger. This is a random weed that has grown in my garden that actually needs to get pulled up. And this is mint that's encroaching. This also needs to get pulled up. So you can see evidence of my living mulch of lettuce that I planted pretty liberally all through this garden. Back here, there's another variety of broccoli just starting to get ahead in there. So I'm sure you've heard me talk about my strategy of using living mulch under the broccoli patch. Incidentally, just because you can see this is a volunteer tomato. I don't know where it came from because I did not have tomatoes in this bed, but decided to appear. Maybe it was in my compost. I'm not really sure. I really like to use living mulch in my broccoli bed of lettuce because it maximizes the harvest that you get in a small space. There's lots of other advantages to it too, which I've talked about at length. I won't go into that again, but I have mentioned it many times before in previous videos. So most of that lettuce has bolted at this point. There is some that's still harvestable, which I will need to harvest over the next few days. It's been pretty hot and lettuce is not a fan of heat. So even though I planted heat tolerant varieties in this area, a lot of them are still bolting. So, I'm going to cut it down, but I'm going to let the lower leaves stay because it's still going to provide the benefits of mulching my broccoli. The end of the broccoli here, look at these beautiful poppies. This is the Lawrence grape variety, and I think it's a stunner. These poppies are actually one of the reasons I decided to film this garden tour today, rather than waiting for the garden to dry up a little bit from last night's rain, or rather than waiting for me to have a little more chance to do some weeding and clean up. I wanted to make sure that you guys got to see these poppies in all their glory because they are so beautiful. I really love this variety so far. I will say the individual blooms are not long lasting, maybe 1 to 2 days. It's not very long at all. But because they send up so many blooms, they've been blooming for maybe a week now, and there's still a lot of buds that haven't bloomed yet. So I think we're going to get, it won't be a long season, but it's enough that to me it's worth it because they're so beautiful. So I wanted to make sure that you got to see those. One thing I need to look up about these poppies is this the type of poppy where you can save the seeds for baking? I know there's some type of poppies where you can save the seeds and some where the seeds aren't the right type for baking. So I need to look up if this is the right kind, and if it is, that will be a beautiful bonus harvest. Either way, the seed heads are really pretty. Not quite as stunning as the flowers, but still really beautiful in their own way. So across the walk here is my cherry tomato patch. Now we haven't actually harvested any tomatoes yet, but you can see there are lots that are getting ready for us. So I've got a pretty big variety of cherry tomatoes in this bed. I've got Sun Gold, which is my classic favorite, Matt's Wild Cherry. I've got Rosella, Barry's Crazy Cherry, Hartman's Yellow Gooseberry, which I'm trying this year for the first time, Red Centiflora. I think that's all the varieties. Oh, Black Cherry also, I forgot that one. I think that's all the varieties I have for cherry tomatoes this year, but I like to always grow a nice variety because I like to make sure we have a lot of colors, we have a lot of flavors, and I just, if you're going to grow your own fruit, you might as well make it something really enjoyable and really different. So the next bed over here, this is my sauce tomato bed. You can see I have not gotten to mulching that yet, which isn't good. I really need to do that. You can see I'm starting to get some tomatoes here and there. These sauce tomatoes are determinate tomatoes, which means that they're going to yield all their tomatoes pretty much at the same time. So while they are starting to make their first tomatoes now, those won't ripen until the plant has set all of the tomatoes that it's going to produce, and then they'll all ripen pretty closely within, a week or two of each other, which is really convenient when you're planning to make sauce or salsa, something where you'll be processing them and you need a lot all at the same time. So that's why most people, when they're growing sauce tomatoes, prefer a determinate variety. So heading back to the shady little bed in the corner. This is all parsley from last year. I just let it all go to seed. And look, we've got a little friend here. This is a swallowtail. This is a black swallowtail caterpillar. You can see he doesn't like me messing with his stem. He's putting out his little orange antlers there, telling me to go away. So if you see a little caterpillar like that shows up they like dill, they like parsley, I think they'll eat carrots, wild Queen Anne's lace, they like fennel. So if you plant any of those plants, and you're in the range of this butterfly, the black swallowtail, you may end up with caterpillars on your plants. I always let them eat my plants when they show up. I mean, it's a really small sacrifice for this beautiful butterfly that, brings so much joy. So to me, it's worth it to just let the caterpillars be. Sometimes I have even brought them into my house to raise. We didn't do that this year. There are actually 2 of them out here. I don't see the other one right now, but throughout this parsley, I have found 2 of them. So also in this bed, I have a second planting of zucchini. This is actually a white Lebanese, which I think is considered a kusa, not a zucchini, but it's basically like a zucchini. A few different nasturtiums. I'm loving the variegation on this one. So pretty. And then across the walkway here, I've got this beautiful chamomile plant. This chamomile actually overwintered from last year. You can see it's coming out of the ground here, and it's big and sprawling. I have never had chamomile overwinter for me before, but when I saw this plant come up in the spring, it wasn't coming up like a seedling. It was coming up like a previously established plant. So this was a plant from last year that overwintered, and this has probably been one of my most productive chamomile plants this year. So, that's really nice that it overwintered and gave me a nice early harvest of chamomile. So this bed here, the chamomile is on the end of it down here. I've got some more volunteer tomatoes. I, again, didn't grow tomatoes in this bed. So they just seem to be either in my compost or they're just spreading everywhere. This is my second broccoli bed. I won't uncover this one because it looks pretty similar to my other one. But you can see there's broccoli in there, starting to get little broccoli heads. And then also I've got the living mulch of lettuce. On this side over here, this section is in a bit of transition right now, aside from these beautiful poppies. You can see I've got more of those. One thing I noticed, this side of the bed gets a lot more shade, and notice how the poppies are leaning. The poppies in the other bed that I first showed you are in full sun. They get a lot more sun, and those are a lot more upright. These plants, which get probably be considered partial sun over here, are leaning. Now, I did really appreciate the beds in full sun. Those poppies don't need to be staked, they're just naturally upright, which, you know, I really appreciate because poppies do tend to lean. These here, I'm guessing it's because they're in a shadier spot, so that's just something to keep in mind with certain plants like that prefer full sun. Sometimes if you plant them in shade, they'll be kind of stretching out to reach the sun, and it will make them not quite as upright, but just as beautiful. So under the poppies, this was my first lettuce planting, and you can see they're pretty much bolted here. So I need to decide if I'm going to save any of these for seed and then pull the rest out. Over here was an early planting of Asian greens, which all went to seed and bolted really early. Didn't really get anything out of them. And of course weeds. So I may leave the Swiss chard because I think this will do well over the winter. And a little tiny zucchini that I just planted. I think I'm going to pull out everything else over here and replant. So I'm not sure what I'm going to replant in there yet. I may try for another harvest of summer lettuce. That's a little risky because lettuce doesn't usually like to be planted this late in the summer. But I may give it a try. I may throw some more zucchini in there, or I may throw some bush beans. I'm not really sure, but I will. Whatever I decide to put in there, I will keep you posted. Let me know if you have any suggestions. So this bed, you can see I've got a trellis arching over this bed, and we've got pole beans. This is purple potted pole on this side. You can see the stems are purple. A lot of times when you have a plant with purple fruits, the whole plant will carry some of that pigment. On this side over here, I've got rattlesnake pole beans. This is a green bean with purple streaks, but you can see the beans are the plants themselves are completely green. And then over here, I've also got beans. These are rattlesnake beans as well. I don't know if you remember earlier in the season, we took a little bit of a risk and planted these before our last official frost date because I didn't think we were going to get frost and I had enough extra seeds. And you can see that little bit of risk paid off because these are way ahead of all my other beans. On this side here, I've got Vortex beans. These are a little bit behind because they were nibbled on when they first came up by slugs again. But they are really starting to catch up now. So this bed behind me, this is my kale and cabbage and sprouting broccoli bed. So you've probably noticed that I have a handful of beds in my garden that I have covered with this insect netting here. That is because all the beds that are covered are brassicas. You know, that includes broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. Everything in that family is really susceptible to a pest called the cabbage moth. And what happens is this little white butterfly that comes and lays eggs on the plants. And then the caterpillars will devour your plants completely in a really short time. I find that the easiest way to deal with that is just to prevent it from happening in the first place. So I always cover those crops when I plant them with insect netting as soon as I plant them. That way the butterfly never gets the chance to lay those eggs. Now, you probably did see in the garden expansion, I had a bed with kale and broccoli, basically all my extra kale and broccoli, that was not covered. And I did show you how that's getting eaten. There are tiny cabbage worms on there, so I am going to go ahead and deal with that. But this saves me a lot of work because I'm not going to have to deal with it on any of the beds in this main garden. So, in this bed here, I didn't mention Swiss chard. I have Swiss chard from last year that's going to seed. And I'm just going to let it so I can get some seeds. So in here I've got a variety of kales. This is red Russian kale. Lots of that. I'm not sure what my favorite one is. Here is blue curled Scotch. Down here, this is a Savoy cabbage. Got an early Jersey Wakefield cabbage. And let's see, here's some dazzling blue lacinato kale. I like to grow all these varieties because I think they are really pretty together and they have slightly different flavors and textures. And cabbage, I think, is one of those highly underappreciated vegetables. I think it's so beautiful when it grows in the garden. Then over here, I've got my sprouting broccoli. So we've already harvested 2 batches off the sprouting broccoli. You know, sprouting broccoli is a little different than regular heading broccoli. It gets the initial head, but it's a lot smaller. It's only a couple inches. So I came through and I harvested the main heads on all of the broccoli plants. And then sprouting broccoli is known for putting off a lot of side shoots after you harvest that main head. That's the main benefit of growing sprouting broccoli. So I did come out and harvest a second harvest, all of side shoots. And you can see it's starting to put off another batch of side shoots. So I'll have to come out here again. Some of these, like that one, really needs to be harvested. I'll have to come out here again and pull the rest of these out. And okay, glad I opened this up because some of my beans from the trellis here have made their way under the insect netting and started growing throughout my broccoli, which is not ideal. So I'm gonna have to disentangle that and get that growing where it's supposed to be. So after a little investigation, I determined that that bean is a rogue bean volunteer. It's not actually one that I planted along this trellis here. I did have beans growing in the same spot last year, so I'm guessing that a seed randomly made its way in there and planted itself. So I'm just gonna let it be and we're gonna find out what happens. So across the walkway here, lots more bolted lettuce. So I'm just gonna pull this out at some point. I have a really big clover that planted itself in here. My plan originally with this clover was to chop it down at the base and use it for mulch, but as you can see, still haven't gotten to that yet. This is a carrot that was growing here last year that has gone to seed. So, and I've got a second one down here, gone to seed. You can see it looks a lot like Queen Anne's lace. And I'm just going to let this go and hopefully harvest some seeds from this. So let's walk around to the other side of this bed here where you will see my massive pumpkin that has plans to take over the world, or at least the garden. So this is, I'm sure I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation because I don't speak French, Musky de Provence pumpkin. And this is my first year growing it. It makes really beautiful pumpkins and they're supposed to be delicious too. So we're just gonna see what happens. It's a little bit of an experiment. I decided to just try it. And this one is growing with wild enthusiasm and abandon, taking over the bed. So we're gonna see exactly what happens with it. This is actually, you can tell because it's in a distinct pattern. It's following the veins of the leaves. This is natural silver variegation. Lots of squashes and zucchinis have this. At some point in the season, my squashes probably will get powdery mildew, and I'll show you the difference when I get that. That doesn't really have a pattern, it just kind of covers the leaf. It's not random. It's random, it's not like this. So one thing I do have to do in the next few days is come out and search the undersides of all my squash leaves for squash bug eggs because it's that time of year. So on the trellis on the middle of this bed, you can see I have tomatoes growing and they're looking decent. You know, I've had better looking tomato years. One thing I will say this year, I'm not going to be including my container garden in this tour. I'm going to do a separate container garden tour to show you everything growing on my deck because it'll be too long if I do it all in one. That will most likely be my next video. But when you see that, you're going to see that unusually this year, my tomatoes in pots on my deck look a lot better than my tomatoes in the ground. That's very unusual for me because usually my tomatoes in pots on the deck, you know, they kind of do okay. They give me the bare minimum, just enough to ensure that I plant them again next year. And the ones in the ground usually do a lot more. So for some reason this year it's the opposite. These tomatoes, they look fine. I don't really have any concerns about them. But the ones on the deck are really flourishing. So stay tuned for that video, most likely next, and you can see the difference between these plants. So that being said, I am still happy with how these tomatoes look. And as you can see, we're starting to get some small tomato fruits. If we go across the walkway here, the tomatoes in this bed actually look significantly better. I think this bed might get slightly more sun. And this is a Wisconsin 55, one of my new favorites. and you can see lots of tomatoes forming on this bed. Down here, this is a Cindy's West Virginia. This is a delicious heirloom. And here's a climbing triple crop. This one doesn't have tomatoes yet, but it's got some flowers. I am experimenting a bit with tomatoes this year. So heirlooms are my favorite go-to tomatoes. I love them. There's so much variety. They're so delicious. But they are a little more challenging to grow. They don't yield quite as much as many hybrids. And they're a little more disease prone. So because of that, I'm experimenting with adding some hybrids into the mix too. I still have mostly heirlooms, but I wanted to add a couple hybrids, mostly to extend the season in the hopes that they will continue yielding once my heirlooms have kind of succumbed to disease and slowed down. So I'll keep you updated on those as the season goes on. At the end of the season, I'll do a full tomato review of all the tomatoes I grew this year, and yeah, I'll just give you the rundown. But for now, you get to see the in progress. So in front of the tomatoes, I've got some zucchinis growing. I have two types here. I've got the Cocozelle, which is an Italian striped zucchini, and I've got the long white Palermo, which is also Italian, and that is a long pale green zucchini. Few Cosmos, zinnia. This is my Queen Lime zinnia, which is really pretty. See how like muted and antique toned those petals are? I really love that one. And then we've got one final bed to look at in this section of the garden. This side of the bed is similar to other parts, kind of in transition, a little bit of a mess. I have a couple, these are butterbush squash. Similar to the pumpkin, you can see the silvery veining on the leaves. This is not powdery mildew. This is natural. And these are both a bush variety of butternut squash, so it grows more like a zucchini rather than a climber. And some random bush beans here. I did plant this whole area with bush beans. A lot of them got eaten by slugs, and these are the strong survivors here. Some more here. And here is another sowing of bush beans just coming up. A random celery plant. And then let's walk around to the other side and take a look at those tomatoes. So along the fence here, more tomato plants. I have not had my first ripe tomato yet, and I am eagerly waiting. Here is my one watermelon plant over here that looks decent. Somehow the slugs didn't, I guess they did nibble at it. Somehow this one survived. I've planted a bunch. Actually, this looks like a new sprout here. But I planted a bunch all through here that got eaten by slugs. And then down here I've got one. So you can see it's been nibbled on. So we'll see if it survives. So that's my garden tour right now. As I said, I did warn you ahead of time that I am not the neatest gardener. I do what needs to be done, and I don't really worry about weeds unless they're affecting my plants. So my garden isn't the neatest, but I love it, and I still think it's beautiful. So thank you so much for walking through the garden with me on this toasty morning. I enjoyed coming out here and sharing my garden with you and taking a look at the plants and all the progress they're making. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.